want you to imagine a room. Not a big dramatic courtroom like you see on television, but the kind of room where real lives get decided. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. Wooden benches worn smooth by decades of people who came before you, each one carrying a story they never thought they would have to tell. That was me, sitting in courtroom 7C of the Dallas County Family Court. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember because the judge asked me the date during my testimony, and I said it without thinking. October 14th. I had been counting the days for 6 months. I knew exactly what day it was. On the bench across from me sat my husband of 8 years, Mark, and next to him, holding his hand like she had every right to be there, was my best friend. Jenna, she was looking at me, not with guilt, not with shame. She was looking at me the way she had looked at me for 10 years, like she was waiting for me to break, like she had already decided that I would. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I folded my hands in my lap, crossed my ankles under the chair, and I waited. Let me tell you how we got here. Because if I don't tell you the beginning, you won't understand why the ending mattered so much. I met Jenna in the fall of 2004, University of Texas at Austin. Freshman year. We were assigned as roommates in Jester Hall, which was loud and chaotic, and smelled like instant ramen and cheap perfume. She walked in with a suitcase that was too big for the closet and a smile that filled the entire room. Well, she said, looking around like she was appraising a piece of real estate, this is going to be either the best year of our lives or a complete disaster. I laughed. I was quiet back then. Still am, in some ways. I let other people fill the space because I learned early that people who talk too much rarely listen well. But Jenna talked enough for both of us, and somewhere between the all-night study sessions and the late-night runs to Whataburger and the crying phone calls home when we both missed our mothers, she became my person. For 10 years, that's what she was. My person. When my father had his first heart attack, she drove 3 hours to sit with me in the hospital waiting room. When I got the promotion I thought I wasn't qualified for, she was the first person I called. When I met Mark at a mutual friend's barbecue, it was Jenna who pulled me aside afterward and said, "That man was looking at you like you hung the moon." She introduced us, actually. Mark was a friend of her boyfriend at the time. Just a casual thing. A backyard barbecue with too many burgers and not enough chairs. I was standing by the cooler, trying to figure out if anyone would notice if I took 2 beers instead of 1, and Mark walked over and said, "If you take 2, I'll take the blame." That was it. That was the moment. 22 words, and my entire life pivoted. We dated for 2 years. He proposed in a tiny Italian restaurant on Henderson Avenue, the one with the red checkered tablecloths and the owner who sings opera on Fridays. He was nervous. His hands were shaking when he opened the box, and I said yes before he even finished asking. Jenna was my maid of honor. She planned the bachelorette weekend, gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that made everyone cry, and stood beside me in a navy blue dress while I promised to love this man for the rest of my life. She caught the bouquet. We all laughed about it. I remember thinking, this is how it should be. This is what a life looks like when you do it right. For a while, that's what we had. Mark and I bought a house in Richardson, a 3-bedroom with a backyard that was mostly weeds and a front porch that sagged on one side. We fixed it up together. I picked the paint colors. He rewired the living room. We argued about the kitchen cabinets for 6 weeks before I finally let him win. And he bought me flowers the next day as a thank you for being reasonable, which was his way of saying he knew I was right. We had a routine. Coffee in the mornings, him standing at the counter reading the news on his phone, me sitting on the floor tying my shoes because I never could do it standing up. Dinner at the kitchen table most nights. Sometimes takeout, sometimes something I tried to cook that turned out edible. Sometimes leftovers from the weekend when we pretended we knew how to grill. I thought we were happy. I think we were happy. Or I was. Maybe that was the problem. I was so busy being happy that I wasn't paying attention. You learn things about people over time. Small things. The way they hold their coffee cup. The way they laugh when they think something is genuinely funny versus the way they laugh when they're just being polite. The way their voice changes when they say a name that means something to them. I knew Jenna's laugh, I knew Mark's voice. I thought that meant I knew everything I needed to know. But here's what I've learned about betrayal. It doesn't show up with a warning label. It doesn't announce itself. It moves slowly, quietly, in the spaces between phone calls and the minutes after midnight when you're already asleep and your phone is face down on the nightstand. It wears familiar faces and uses familiar names, and it sits across from you at dinner smiling while it learns exactly how much you trust it. I trusted Jenna with my husband. I trusted her with my home. I trusted her with the parts of my life I didn't even tell my mother about. And that trust was not returned. So now you know the beginning. You know how two people who were supposed to love me ended up on the other side of a courtroom, holding hands like they were the victims of some terrible injustice. You know how I went from standing at my wedding with my best friend beside me to sitting alone on a wooden bench with a binder in my lap and a judge who didn't know any of us. What you don't know yet is what happened in between. What you don't know is why I was smiling on the inside while Jenna was smiling at me from across the room. And what you don't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had been waiting for this day for 6 months. I didn't bring a lawyer that morning. I brought a binder. And inside that binder was everything. I want you to understand something about the way betrayal works. It doesn't arrive like a storm. Storms announce themselves. The sky turns gray. The wind picks up. You have time to close the windows and bring in the patio furniture. Betrayal is nothing like a storm. Betrayal arrives like a slow leak in a pipe behind the wall. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but one day you notice the floorboards feel a little soft, and by the time you finally cut through the drywall, the damage has been there for months. That's how it started with Mark. Small things. The kind of things you explain away because the alternative is unthinkable. It was the spring of 2021. I remember because the azaleas in our front yard had finally bloomed after 3 years of me trying to figure out why they wouldn't. Mark had been working late more often. He was a commercial real estate broker, and the market was picking up after a slow year, so it made sense. Or, I told myself it made sense. He would come home at 9, then 10, then sometimes after I had already gone to bed. I would wake up to the sound of the garage door opening, listen to his footsteps on the stairs, feel the mattress shift when he finally got into bed. In the mornings he was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who have been married long enough to share silence. This was a different quiet, a careful quiet, like he was measuring every word before he said it. I asked him once, about 6 weeks into it. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing coffee mugs, and I said, "Is everything okay? You seem different lately." He was standing behind me. I could see his reflection in the window above the sink. He paused for just a second too long, and then he smiled. "Just busy," he said. "The Henderson project is eating my life. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I had seen him work through deals before. The late nights, the stress, the way he would disappear into his home office and not come out until midnight. So I let it go. That was my first mistake. Jenna, meanwhile, had become a constant presence in our lives again. She had gone through a divorce 2 years earlier. A bad one. Her husband had run up credit card debt she didn't know about, taken out a second mortgage on their house, and then left her for a woman he met at a work conference in Orlando. She had been a mess for about a year. I had been there for every minute of it. Midnight phone calls, weekend trips to her apartment with wine and takeout, the kind of friendship where you don't ask, you just show up. By 2021, she was back on her feet. New apartment, new job at a marketing firm downtown, and suddenly she was around all the time. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? She was my best friend. She was Mark's friend, too. The three of us had been a unit for years. It was normal for her to come over for dinner, to text him about random things, to be part of our lives. But here's what I noticed later, when I went back through those months in my mind. She started texting him directly instead of texting me. Little things at first. Can Mark pick up that thing from Home Depot? Or tell Mark I finally tried that restaurant he recommended. Innocent enough, except she stopped asking me to relay messages. She just went straight to him. I didn't notice that then. I notice it now. I notice all of it now. The first real crack happened on a Saturday in July. Mark said he had to go into the office for a few hours. Something about a client who could only meet on weekends. I didn't think twice about it. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, bought too many peaches and a loaf of sourdough I didn't need, and came home to a quiet house. At around 1 in the afternoon, I texted Jenna to see if she wanted to grab lunch. She replied about 20 minutes later, which was unusual for her. She was usually quick. "Can today," she said. "Out of town for the weekend, visiting my sister." I didn't think anything of it. Her sister lived in Austin. It was plausible. Mark came home around 4. He was in a good mood. Light. Easy. He kissed me on the forehead and said, "What do you want for dinner?" That night we grilled steaks on the back patio. The heat had finally broken, and there was a breeze coming in from the east. We sat outside until the stars came out, talking about nothing in particular. It felt like old times. I remember thinking, that night, that maybe I had been imagining things, that maybe the distance I had felt was just the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage, that maybe he really was just busy. I was so relieved to feel normal again that I didn't ask the one question I should have asked. I didn't ask him how the meeting went. I didn't ask him who the client was. I didn't ask for any detail at all, because I didn't want to disrupt the peace. I wanted to hold on to the version of my life where my husband came home on a Saturday evening and grilled steaks and everything was fine. That was my second mistake. A few weeks later, I was sitting in Jenna's apartment, helping her pick out paint colors for her bedroom. She had decided to redecorate. New start, she said, new colors, new energy. I was holding 2 paint swatches up to the wall, trying to decide between a pale blue and a soft gray, when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, picked it up, and smiled at the screen. Then she typed something quickly and put the phone face down on the table. It was nothing. People check their phones 100 times a day, but something about the way she smiled, that particular smile, stuck with me. It was the same smile she used to have when she was dating someone new, the smile she had when she was keeping a secret she was excited about. I didn't say anything. I just handed her the paint swatches and said, "I think the gray is better." She agreed. We moved on. Looking back, I can trace every single moment. They are etched into my memory like dates carved into stone. July 17th, the Saturday he said he was at the office. August 3rd, the night she mentioned a restaurant she had been to recently. The same restaurant Mark had taken me to 6 months earlier and said we should keep as our place. September 12th, when I found a receipt in Mark's car for a gas station in a town neither of us had any reason to visit. Each moment was small, each moment was explainable, and each moment I chose to believe the explanation because the alternative was too heavy to carry. I didn't know yet that they were building a world that didn't include me. I didn't know that every late night, every text message, every time one of them said a name and the other smiled, I didn't know that I was being slowly, carefully removed from my own life. But here's what I know now. When you go back and look at the soft floorboards, you don't blame yourself for not noticing the leak sooner. You don't spend your time wondering why you didn't cut through the drywall earlier. You look at the damage, you measure it, you document it, and you figure out who is going to pay for it. That is exactly what I did. The summer turned into fall. Mark's late nights became more frequent. Jenna started canceling our coffee dates more often. When the 3 of us were together, there was a new energy between them. Not flirtatious, exactly. It was more like they were sharing a joke I wasn't part of. A shorthand that had developed without me. I felt it. Of course I felt it. But I had been taught my whole life that trust is a choice, that marriage is a commitment, that friendship is loyalty, and I was committed to all of it. So I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that if I loved them enough, trusted them enough, the distance would close. It didn't close. It widened. And by the time October arrived, I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't name yet. A suspicion without proof, a feeling without a shape. A leak behind a wall that I was finally starting to hear. Let me tell you exactly how it happened. Not the version I told myself afterward to make the story easier to carry. Not the version where I was brave and composed and saw everything coming from a mile away. The real version. The one where I was standing in my own kitchen on a Tuesday evening in October, holding a phone that was not my own, and watching my entire life rearrange itself into something I no longer recognized. It was October 19th. I remember the date because I had written it on a sticky note that morning. Dentist appointment at 2:30, pick up dry cleaning, call my mother back. The ordinary architecture of a Tuesday. Mark had left his phone on the kitchen counter. He never did that. He was careful about his phone the way people are careful when they have something to hide. It was always in his pocket or face down on his nightstand or tucked into the console of his car, but that morning he was running late. I heard him in the garage, the car starting, the door closing, and then the silence of a house that had just emptied. And there it was, his phone sitting next to the coffee maker, screen dark, waiting. I didn't pick it up right away. That matters to me now. The fact that I didn't grab it the second he left. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug. I stood at the window and watched a squirrel run along the fence line. I was not a suspicious person. That was the story I told myself about who I was. A trusting person. A patient person. The kind of person who did not go through her husband's phone. And then I picked it up. The screen lit up with notifications. 3 texts from Jenna. I saw her name first, and I smiled. We were supposed to have lunch that Friday. Maybe she was confirming, maybe she was running late for something else. My brain was still in the old world, the one where Jenna was my best friend and Mark was my husband, and the 3 of us were a unit that had survived 10 years of life. I opened the messages without thinking. I opened them the way you open a letter that you assume is for you. Here's what I read. The first message, I can still smell you on my skin. The second message, last night was perfect. I don't know how we keep doing this without her noticing. The third message, are we ever going to stop hiding? I read them 3 times. Not because I didn't understand them. I understood them perfectly the first time. I read them again because I was waiting for my brain to offer an alternative explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she was talking about someone else. Maybe there was context I was missing. My mind ran through every door, looking for the one that didn't lead to the place I was already standing. There was no other door. I put the phone down. I picked it up again. I read the messages a 4th time, and then a 5th, and then I stopped counting because counting was something people did when they were trying not to feel what was actually happening to them. I stood in my kitchen for what felt like an hour, but was probably 4 minutes. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone against the wall, although I thought about it. I stood very still, the way you stand when you realize you are standing on something fragile, and any movement might break it further. And then I did something I still think about. I opened the message thread and I scrolled up. I scrolled back through weeks of conversations I was never meant to see. There were hundreds of messages. Hundreds. They stretched back to July, maybe earlier. I didn't have time to read them all, not then, but I read enough. I read about hotel rooms. I read about afternoons I thought were work meetings. I read about a weekend in Austin when Jenna told me she was visiting her sister, and Mark told me he was meeting with a client. I read their private jokes, their shared memories, their plans for a future that did not include me. I read the words my husband used to describe my body, my habits, my naivety. I read the words my best friend used to describe her patience, her guilt, her growing certainty that she was the one he should have married in the first place. I read until my hands stopped shaking, and then I put the phone back exactly where I found it, face down on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment. I was not brave. I was not strategic. I was not the cool-headed woman I would become 6 months later, sitting in a courtroom with a binder full of evidence. In that moment, I was a woman who had just discovered that the 2 people she trusted most in the world had been dismantling her life while she stood in the same kitchen making coffee and worrying about dentist appointments. I was a woman who had been made a fool of. I was a woman who had slept beside a man who had come home from another woman's bed and kissed me goodnight like nothing had happened. I was a woman who had laughed with her best friend over wine and appetizers while that same woman was counting the days until she could take my place. I was not brave, I was destroyed. And from that destruction something else began to form. Not courage. Not yet. It was something colder. Something quieter. It was the recognition that I had been given a gift I did not want but could not refuse. I had been shown the truth. Not the version of the truth they would have offered me if I had confronted them. Not the version where they trickle truth their way through half-confessions and carefully worded apologies. The real truth in writing unguarded, on a phone they never thought I would see. That was the gift. I just didn't know what to do with it yet. I spent the next 3 days moving through my life like a ghost. I went to work. I made dinner. I sat across from Mark at the table and listened to him talk about his day. I answered Jenna's texts like nothing had changed. Friday lunch happened. I sat across from her in a restaurant we had been going to for years, watched her smile, watched her reach across the table to touch my hand, watched her ask me about my week with the same concerned expression she had worn since college. And I smiled back. I told her about the dentist appointment. I told her about my mother. I told her nothing about the phone, about the messages, about the 4 minutes I had spent standing in my kitchen watching my life end. I smiled and I ate my salad and I paid for lunch, and I hugged her goodbye and I drove home, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. That was the moment I decided. Not to leave him, although I knew eventually I would. Not to confront her, although I knew eventually I would want to. I decided to wait. I decided to watch. I decided to let them believe I was exactly what they thought I was. A trusting woman, a patient woman, a woman who did not go through her husband's phone. And while they believed that, I would learn everything I needed to know. Over the next 6 months, I became someone I did not recognize. I became a collector. I gathered hotel receipts from the glove compartment of his car when he was in the shower. I photographed credit card statements before he could file them. I learned the passwords to accounts I had never touched because I believed in separate finances and the dignity of privacy. I became meticulous. I became patient. I became the kind of person who could sit across from her husband at dinner, listen to him lie about where he had been, and say nothing because saying something would end the game before I had won it. And Jenna gave me everything I needed. She was careless in the way people are careless when they think they are the smartest person in the room. She posted photos on social media that I screenshotted and dated. She mentioned restaurants he had taken her to, trips they had taken, gifts he had bought her, always framing them as things she had done alone or with other friends. I let her. I nodded. I asked follow-up questions. I watched her face when she answered. And I learned the difference between the lies she told because she thought she had to and the lies she told because she enjoyed them. By the time Mark filed for divorce in March, I had 300 pages of documentation, 300 pages of hotel receipts, credit card charges, text message exchanges I had accessed through a phone bill he never looked at, property records that showed he had transferred money from our joint account to accounts I had never seen. I had photos of them together in places he told me he was alone. I had a list of every gift he had bought her, cross-referenced with credit card statements he thought I would never check. I had her own words, her own posts, her own carefully curated timeline of a relationship she was building while I was still wearing my wedding ring. And then in April, I found the thing that changed everything. I found the pregnancy. It was a text message from Jenna to her sister, sent 3 months earlier, that I found when I finally accessed her old phone through a mutual friend who did not know what I was doing. The message was short. I told Mark I'm pregnant. He doesn't know it's fake yet. I just need him to leave her. Once he does, I'll figure out the rest. I read that message 20 times. I read it until I could recite it from memory. I read it until the words lost their meaning, and then I read it again until the meaning came back, sharper than before. She was not pregnant. She had never been pregnant. She had told him she was to push him into leaving me. She had fabricated a child to force his hand. And Mark, my husband of 8 years, the man who had promised to love me until death, had believed her. Or maybe he had not believed her. Maybe he had wanted to believe her. Maybe the idea of a child with her was the permission he needed to finally do what he had wanted to do for months. I did not care about the difference. What I cared about was the forgery, the lie, the manipulation of a life that did not exist. I added that message to my binder. I tabbed it in yellow. When Mark finally filed for divorce, he did it with a lawyer who had no idea what was coming. He filed in March, citing irreconcilable differences. He asked for a fair division of assets. He did not mention Jenna. He did not mention the hundreds of thousands of dollars he had moved out of our joint accounts. He did not mention the property in Galveston I later discovered he had purchased in her name. He filed like it was a simple case. 2 people who had grown apart. A marriage that had run its course. He had no idea that I had been preparing for this day longer than he had been planning his escape. Jenna came to the first hearing. She sat in the gallery, 3 rows behind me, wearing a sundress and a small, sympathetic smile. She was there to support me, she told my mother. She was there because I needed a friend. I watched her from the corner of my eye, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not anger, not sadness. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally understand that the person across from you is not your enemy because she hurt you. She is your enemy because she believes she had the right to hurt you. She believes she was entitled to your husband, your marriage, your life, and she will smile at you while she takes it. I smiled back at her. I folded my hands in my lap, and I waited for the day I had been waiting for since October 19th. The day I would open the binder. Here is what most people get wrong about patience. They think it is passive. They think it means sitting quietly and letting things happen to you. They think it is the absence of action, the surrender of control, the soft resignation of someone who has decided that fighting is not worth the effort. That is not patience. That is fear wearing a comfortable sweater. Real patience is active. Real patience is a strategy. It is the decision to let someone else move first because you know that when they do, they will move in the direction you have already prepared for them. I learned that in the 6 months between October and March. I learned that the person who waits is not the person who loses. The person who waits is the person who decides when the game ends. I did not tell anyone what I found on Mark's phone. Not my mother. Who would have driven from Houston to Dallas that same night with a suitcase and a plan? Not my sister, who had never liked Mark, and would have celebrated my discovery with a bottle of champagne I was not ready to drink. Not my lawyer, because I did not have a lawyer yet, and I knew that getting one would make everything real in a way I was not prepared for. I kept it to myself. I carried it alone, and in the silence I built around that knowledge, I began to work. The first thing I did was stop being a wife. I do not mean I stopped making dinner, or sleeping in the same bed, or answering when Mark asked me how my day was. I did all of those things. I did them the same way I had always done them, or close enough that he did not notice the difference. What I stopped was the part of me that believed in us. I stopped hoping he would come home early. I stopped checking his phone for more messages. I stopped wondering if there was some version of this story where I confronted him and he apologized and we found our way back to each other. I let that version die. I buried it quietly, without ceremony, and I did not visit the grave. What replaced it was something I did not have a name for yet. A kind of watchfulness. A willingness to see things as they were instead of how I wanted them to be. I started paying attention to the small things I had trained myself to ignore. The way Mark's phone was always face down. The way he showered immediately when he came home from work, even on days when he had not been to the gym. The way he stopped saying Jenna's name in front of me. Not because he was hiding something, but because he had trained himself to talk about her the way you talk about a habit you are trying to quit. I noticed all of it. I wrote none of it down. I did not need to. I was building something more permanent than notes on a piece of paper. I was building a memory so detailed that 6 months later I could still recite the date of every hotel stay, the cost of every gift, the timestamp of every text message that proved what I already knew. The second thing I did was open a separate bank account. Not a joint account, not an account Mark could see. I opened it at a credit union on the other side of town, the kind of place that still uses paper statements and does not ask too many questions. I started moving money. Not large amounts, not enough to trigger an alert or make him look twice at our balances. $200 here, $300 there. Enough to build a safety net without building suspicion. I told myself it was for the divorce, which I knew was coming, even if I did not know when, but it was also for something deeper. It was the first time in 8 years that I had money Mark did not know about. It was the first time I had a door he did not have the key to. I did not know how much I needed that door until I opened it. The third thing I did was the hardest. I stayed friends with Jenna. I did more than stay friends. I leaned in. I called her more often. I suggested lunch, coffee, the long walks we used to take around White Rock Lake before her life became a competition. I did not know I was losing. I asked her about her life. I asked her about the man she was seeing, the one she mentioned in vague terms but never named. I watched her face when she lied to me, and I learned something I had never known about her. She was good at lying. Not great, but good. She had tells. A slight hesitation before she answered certain questions. A tendency to touch her hair when she was saying something she knew was not true. A way of changing the subject that was just abrupt enough to notice if you were looking for it. I was looking for it. I noticed everything. There were moments when I hated her. Not the hot, explosive hate that makes you want to scream or throw things. It was colder than that. It was the kind of hate that lives in your bones, that settles into your chest and stays there, that makes you wonder how you ever loved someone who could do this to you. But there were also moments when I almost understood her, not because what she did was understandable, but because I could see how she had gotten there. The divorce that left her broke and humiliated. The years of watching me have something she wanted. the slow, quiet erosion of a woman who had been told one too many times that she was not enough. I did not forgive her. I did not come close to forgiving her. But I understood her, and understanding her was the most dangerous weapon I had because it let me predict her. By January I knew what was coming before she did. Mark was going to leave me. He was going to file for divorce, and he was going to do it in a way that made him look like the reasonable one, the one who had tried, the one who had stayed as long as he could. And Jenna was going to be there when he did. She was going to play the supportive friend, the shoulder to cry on, the woman who just happened to be there when my marriage fell apart. I could see the whole script. I could see the way they would tell the story to anyone who asked. She was never the cause. She was just the consolation prize. The woman who waited until it was over to step into the space I left behind. I decided to let them have that story. I decided to let them believe I did not see it coming. I decided to let them think I was the woman they had always assumed I was, trusting, patient, a little naive, too busy with my own life to notice that my husband was building another one without me. I played that role better than I had ever played anything. I smiled at family dinners. I asked about Jenna's love life. I sat next to Mark on the couch and watched television shows I did not care about, and listened to him talk about his day and pretended that every word he said was not a lie. I became so good at pretending that sometimes I forgot I was pretending at all. But I never forgot the binder. I kept it in the bottom drawer of my desk under a stack of tax returns from 2019 that no one would ever look at. It grew slowly. A hotel receipt from a weekend he said he was in Austin. A credit card charge for a restaurant in Galveston where he had no business being. A text message exchange I photographed on Jenna's phone when she left it on the table at lunch, screenshotted and printed and placed in the blue tab. I organized it by color. Red for financial records, blue for communication, green for property, yellow for the lies that were so bold they almost qualified as their own category. By February, the binder was 200 pages. By March, it was 300. I did not show it to anyone. I did not need to. It was not evidence yet. It was a promise I was making to myself. A promise that when the time came, I would not be the one who was surprised. Mark filed for divorce on March 14th. I remember the date because it was the day before his mother's birthday, which meant he had chosen a moment when my attention would be elsewhere, when I would be focused on buying a card and wrapping a gift, and pretending that his family still felt like mine. He left the papers on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I had found his phone 5 months earlier. He did not say anything when he handed them to me. He just stood there, in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, waiting for me to react. I did not give him what he wanted. I read the papers slowly, carefully, the way you read a contract you are not sure you understand. He was asking for joint custody of the house, joint custody of the savings, joint custody of a life we had built together for 8 years. He was not asking for anything that would make him look like the one who had destroyed it. He was asking for a fair division, a clean break, a story that would hold up in the court of public opinion. I looked up from the papers. I looked at him. He was wearing the sweater I had given him for Christmas, the navy blue one that made his eyes look darker. He had worn it on purpose, I realized. He had worn it because he wanted me to remember that he was still the man I had loved, still the man who had chosen me, still the man who deserved a soft landing. I felt something shift in my chest, not forgiveness, not understanding. It was the final death of the person I had been before October 19th. She died in that moment quietly, without drama, and I did not mourn her. I said, okay. I said, I will have my lawyer look at this. I said, can we talk about it later? I said all the things a woman says when she has been blindsided, when she is trying to hold herself together, when she is trying to figure out how her life got to this place. He nodded. He looked relieved. He left the room. And I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the binder. I opened it to the first page. I read the first entry. A hotel receipt from the Hyatt in Austin, dated July 17th, paid for with a credit card that had both of our names on it. I turned to the next page. A photograph of Jenna at a restaurant in Galveston, posted on her Instagram account, dated August 3rd, captioned with a single word, weekending. I turned to the next page and the next page and the next. 300 pages of proof that my husband had been unfaithful, that my best friend had been conspiring against me, that the life I thought I had was a lie built on the foundation of my own willingness to believe in it. I closed the binder. I put it back in the drawer. And I called a lawyer. Not the lawyer Mark had expected me to call, the one who specialized in amicable divorces and fair divisions and clean breaks. I called a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, a forensic divorce attorney who had built her career on cases where one party thought they were the smartest person in the room. I found her through a friend of a friend, someone who knew her from a case she had won against a man who had hidden assets in 3 different countries. I called her the day after Mark filed. I told her I had a binder. I told her I'd been waiting for 6 months. I told her I was ready to stop waiting. She met me at her office the next morning. It was a small space on the 6th floor of a building downtown. The kind of office that does not waste money on fancy furniture, because the people who work there do not need to impress anyone. I brought the binder. I placed it on her desk. I watched her open it. Watched her flip through the first few pages, watched her face change from professional curiosity to something I recognized. She saw what I had built. She understood what it meant. When she looked up at me, she was not looking at a client. She was looking at someone who had done her job for her. "You have been busy," she said. I said, "I have been patient." She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who recognized a kindred spirit. "How long have you been waiting?" 6 months, I said, "but it feels longer." She closed the binder. She placed her hand on top of it, a gesture that was almost tender. "We are going to need a bigger binder," she said, "but this is a good start." That was the moment I understood something I had not understood before. I was not a victim. I was not a woman who had been betrayed by her husband and her best friend. I was a woman who had been given the chance to see who they really were before she lost anything she could not get back. I had the binder. I had the proof. I had 6 months of patience that had turned me into someone they did not know existed, and in 3 weeks I was going to walk into a courtroom, sit across from them, and show them exactly who they had been dealing with all along. They thought they were taking my life. They had no idea that I had already built a new one, page by page, waiting for the day I would finally open the binder and let them see it. Patricia Okonkwo did not waste time. The morning after I brought her the binder, she filed a response with the court that made Mark's lawyers sit up straight. It was not angry. It was not dramatic. It was something worse. It was precise. She listed every account, every transfer, every asset I had documented over 6 months of watching. She did not mention Jenna. She did not need to. The money told the story without her name. By the time Mark's lawyer finished reading the response, he knew 2 things. First, that I was not the woman Mark had described. Second, that the simple divorce he had filed in March was about to become something he could not control. Mark called me the night the response was filed. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let it go again. The 3rd time I answered because I wanted to hear his voice, not because I missed him. I wanted to hear what he sounded like when he was afraid. He was afraid. I could hear it in the way he said my name, the way he stretched it into a question he already knew the answer to. He asked me what I was doing. He asked me why I had hired Patricia. He asked me why I had not told him I was keeping records. He asked me all the questions a man asks when he realizes the woman he betrayed was paying closer attention than he thought possible. I did not answer any of them. I told him he should talk to his lawyer. I told him I would see him in court. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had found his phone 5 months earlier, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not relief. Just the quiet satisfaction of a door closing that I had been holding open for too long. Jenna called the next day. I did not answer. She left a voicemail that lasted 2 minutes. She was crying. She was telling me she did not know what was happening. She was telling me she was worried about me. She was telling me she wanted to be there for me, whatever I was going through. I listened to the message twice. The first time, I almost believed her. That was the thing about Jenna. She was so good at performing sincerity that sometimes she convinced herself. The second time, I heard what was underneath. Panic. She had seen the filing. She knew her name was not in it. But she also knew it was only a matter of time. She was calling to see how much I knew. She was calling to see if she could still control the story. I deleted the message. I blocked her number. I did not think about her again until the day of the hearing. The hearing was scheduled for April 12th. Patricia told me to prepare for a long day. She told me to dress conservatively, to speak only when spoken to let her handle the opening statements. She told me to bring the binder. She did not need to tell me that. I had been carrying the binder in my mind for 6 months. Carrying it in my hands was the easy part. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. I made coffee. I sat on the back porch and watched the sun rise over the fence line. It was a clear day, the kind of spring morning that makes you believe in new beginnings. I thought about my mother. She had died when I was 24, 3 years before I met Mark. She never knew him. She never knew Jenna. But she knew me. She knew the kind of woman she raised. I sat on the porch until the sky was fully light, and then I went inside, put on a navy blue dress that matched nothing, and drove to the courthouse. The courthouse in Dallas is a building that does not try to comfort you. It is all hard edges and fluorescent light, the kind of place where you go when something has gone wrong and you need someone in a robe to tell you how wrong it was. I found Patricia in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was reading something on her phone, calm in the way surgeons are calm before a procedure. She looked up when I walked toward her. She looked at the binder in my hands. She smiled the same smile she had smiled in her office 3 weeks earlier. "Are you ready?" she asked. I said I was. She nodded. She pushed open the door to the courtroom, and I followed her inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The benches were polished wood, the kind that looks official until you sit on it and realize it is exactly as uncomfortable as every other bench in every other courthouse. Mark was already there. He was sitting at the respondent's table with his lawyer, a man named Bradley Haynes who had a reputation for settling cases quietly. Mark looked up when I walked in. His face did something complicated. He looked like a man who had convinced himself that everything was going to be fine and was just now realizing that fine was not a word that applied to his situation anymore. He was wearing the navy blue sweater again. I wondered if he had worn it on purpose. I wondered if he thought it would remind me of who he used to be. I sat down at the petitioner's table, placed the binder in front of me, and did not look at him again. The gallery was not full, but it was not empty either. Mark's mother was there, sitting in the 3rd row, her hands folded in her lap. She had always been kind to me, kinder than Mark deserved. I had called her after he filed, not to ask for anything, just to tell her I was sorry. She had cried on the phone. She had told me that whatever happened, I was still family. I believed her. I still believe her. But she was sitting on his side of the courtroom, and that was where she belonged. A woman I did not recognize was sitting 2 rows behind her. She was young, maybe 30, with blonde hair and a dress that was too bright for a courtroom. I did not know who she was. I did not care. What I cared about was the empty seat next to her. The seat where Jenna would have sat if she had been brave enough to show up. She was not there. I had known she would not be. Jenna was brave only when she was in control. When she was not in control, she disappeared. Judge Carolyn Reeves entered at 9 a.m. on the dot. She was a woman in her late 50s, with gray hair cut short and glasses that made her look like a librarian who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked at the 2 tables in front of her. She asked if both parties were present. Bradley Haynes said they were. Patricia said they were. The judge nodded. She looked at the file in front of her. She looked at Mark. She looked at me. She asked if there was any chance of reconciliation. Mark's lawyer said no. Patricia said no. The judge wrote something on a piece of paper. And then she said, "Let's begin." What happened next was not dramatic in the way you see on television. There were no outbursts, no witnesses called to the stand, no moment where someone broke down and confessed everything. What happened was slower than that, and in its own way, more devastating. Patricia stood up. She placed a copy of the binder on the judge's bench. She opened it to the red tab. She began to read. She read the hotel receipts, the dates, the amounts. She read the credit card statements, the charges Mark had made on our joint account for hotels and dinners and gifts I had never seen. She read the property records, the transfer of funds from our joint account to accounts in Mark's name only. She did not rush, she did not embellish. She let the numbers speak for themselves. By the time she finished the red tab, Bradley Haynes was shifting in his seat. Mark was not looking at anyone. He was looking at the table in front of him, his hands flat on the wood, his shoulders tight. Patricia opened the blue tab. She read the text messages, not all of them. She did not need to. She read enough. She read the messages from July, the ones where Mark told Jenna he loved her. She read the messages from August, the ones where they planned weekends away while I was at work. She read the messages from September, the ones where Jenna told her sister she was going to be a mother. She read that message twice, slowly, so the judge could hear it. Mark's mother made a sound I had never heard before. It was not a gasp. It was something smaller, something worse. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the son she raised was not the man she thought he was. Bradley Haynes stood up. He said something about relevance. He said something about privacy. Judge Reeves looked at him over her glasses. She said, "Sit down, Mr. Haynes." He sat down. Patricia opened the green tab. She showed the judge the financial records that proved Mark had moved over $400,000 out of our joint accounts in the 6 months before he filed for divorce. She showed her the property in Galveston, purchased in Jenna's name with money from the account that was supposed to be ours. She showed her the credit card debt Mark had accumulated, the debt he had tried to claim as marital debt, the debt he had hoped I would help him pay off after he left me. The judge read each document carefully. She asked questions. Patricia answered them. I did not say a word. I sat at the table with my hands folded in my lap, the way I had sat at family dinners, the way I had sat in Jenna's apartment while she told me about the man she was seeing, the way I had sat on the couch next to Mark while he told me about his day. I was good at sitting. I had been practicing for 6 months. When Patricia finished, the courtroom was quiet. Not the quiet of a room where nothing is happening. The quiet of a room where everyone is recalculating what they thought they knew. Judge Reeves took off her glasses. She looked at Mark. She looked at me. She looked at the binder that was now the most important document in the room. She asked Bradley Haynes if he had anything to say. He stood up. He said something about misunderstanding. He said something about the difficulty of divorce. He said something about Mark's willingness to cooperate. The judge listened. She did not interrupt. When he was finished, she looked at him for a long moment, and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Mr. Haynes, your client did not just file for divorce. Your client attempted to hide assets, committed financial fraud, and conspired with a third party to deceive this court. If you have anything to say that addresses those facts, I would like to hear it. If you do not, I would like you to sit down." Bradley Haynes sat down. Judge Reeves turned to Patricia. She asked for her recommendation. Patricia stood up again. She spoke for 10 minutes. She laid out the facts of the case. She explained why the property in Galveston belonged to me. She explained why the $400,000 Mark had moved should be returned to the marital estate. She explained why Mark should be responsible for the credit card debt he had accumulated. She explained it all in the calm, methodical way of someone who had done this 100 times before. When she was finished, the judge nodded. She wrote something on a piece of paper. She looked at Mark. She said, "The court finds in favor of the petitioner on all counts." She read her ruling. She awarded me the house. She awarded me the retirement accounts. She awarded me the property in Galveston. She ordered Mark to repay the money he had taken from our joint account. She ordered him to pay my legal fees. And then she looked at Bradley Haynes and said, "If your client ever appears before me again on a matter involving financial deception, I will not be this generous." The hearing lasted 3 hours. When it was over, I stood up. I closed the binder. I placed it under my arm. Patricia touched my elbow and said something I did not hear because I was looking at Mark. He was still sitting at the table. His lawyer was talking to him, but he was not listening. He was looking at me. His face was empty. Not angry, not sad, just empty, the way a face looks when someone has been told something they did not expect, and they have not figured out how to feel about it yet. I wanted to say something to him. I wanted to tell him that I had loved him, that I had believed in him, that I had spent 8 years building a life with him because I thought he was building it with me. But I did not say any of that. I had said enough. I had let the binder say the rest. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I walked toward the elevator and then I stopped. I stood in the middle of the hallway, in the middle of the courthouse, in the middle of a Tuesday that had started like any other day and ended like something I would spend the rest of my life trying to describe. I did not cry. I did not laugh. I stood there holding the binder, and I felt something I had not felt in 6 months. I felt light, not happy, not free. Light, like the weight I had been carrying was finally distributed across the place it belonged. I had not won. Winning implied a game. And this had never been a game. I had done something harder than winning. I had waited. I had watched. I had built something they did not see coming. And when the time came, I had opened the binder and let it speak for me. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and I was alone, finally alone, in a small box of steel and glass that carried me down to the ground floor. I thought about the phone on the kitchen counter. I thought about the 6 months of silence. I thought about the binder still under my arm, still full of pages I had collected one by one. I thought about the woman I was on October 19th, the one who stood in her kitchen and read the messages that broke her life in half. I wondered what she would think of the woman she became. I wondered if she would recognize her. I decided she would. She would recognize the patience. She would recognize the silence. She would recognize the binder. Because even on that day, even when she was standing in the kitchen with her world falling apart, she knew something they did not know. She knew that the story was not over. She knew that she was the one who would write the ending. And she knew that when she finally wrote it, it would not be in tears or screams or accusations. It would be in a binder, with colored tabs, waiting for the day she would open it and let the truth do what the truth always does when you give it enough time. It would set her free. The letters started arriving in May. Not from Jenna. Not from Mark. From people I had not spoken to in years. Friends of friends. College roommates. Mark's second cousin who I had met once at a wedding. They had heard what happened. Someone had told someone who told someone, and now they were writing to me, calling me, showing up at my door with casseroles and sympathy and questions I did not know how to answer. They wanted to know if I was okay. They wanted to know if I needed anything. They wanted to know how I had done it, how I had waited so long, how I had walked into that courtroom with a binder full of evidence and walked out with everything they had tried to take from me. I did not know how to answer them. I did not know how to explain that the woman they were asking about was not the woman I was anymore. That woman had done what she needed to do. She had waited, she had watched, she had built her case, she had won, and then she had gone home and closed the door and realized that winning was not the same as being free. I spent the month of May in a state I did not have a name for. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was something closer to exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones after a long illness, after the fever breaks and you are left with nothing but the slow work of remembering how to stand. I had been running for so long, running toward the hearing, toward the binder, toward the moment when I would finally be able to tell the truth. And now the running was over, and I did not know what to do with the silence that followed. I went to work. I came home. I watered the roses I had planted in the front yard. I sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the neighbors walk their dogs and the children ride their bikes, and the world go on the way it had always gone on, indifferent to the earthquake that had happened in my own life. I felt invisible, not the invisibility of hiding, the invisibility of being seen by no one who understood what you had just survived. Eleanor, my therapist, called it the aftermath. She said it was the part no one talked about. The part after the battle, when the adrenaline fades and the cheering stops, and you are left alone with the person you became in order to survive. She said most people expect victory to feel like something. They expect a parade, a sunrise, a moment of clarity that changes everything. But victory, she said, is not a feeling. Victory is a door. You walk through it, and on the other side is not a party. It is the rest of your life. And the rest of your life does not care what you just survived. It asks you to get up in the morning. It asks you to make coffee. It asks you to be a person again, after months of being something else. I asked her how long it would take. She smiled the way she smiled when I asked questions she could not answer. She said, as long as it takes. I wanted to be angry at her for that. But she was right. There was no timetable. There was no finish line. There was only the slow, unglamorous work of becoming human again. The nightmare started in June. I had not dreamed during the waiting. I had been too focused, too sharp, too busy building my case to let my mind wander into the places it went when I was not in control. But after the hearing, after the verdict, after the door closed on the life I had been holding together with willpower and caffeine, the dreams came. I dreamed about the phone on the kitchen counter. I dreamed about the messages, the words glowing on the screen, the way they had rearranged themselves into a language I could not understand. I dreamed about the courtroom, the fluorescent lights, the sound of the gavel, the way Mark had looked at me when the judge read her decision. I woke up in the dark, my heart racing, my hands clutching the sheets, and I did not know where I was. It took me a moment to remember. I was in my house, the house I had kept, the house that was mine. I would lie in the dark, listening to the silence, and I would wait for my heart to slow down. It always did, but the waiting felt longer than it used to. I told Eleanor about the dreams. She asked me what I thought they meant. I said I thought they meant I was not as strong as I thought I was. She shook her head. She said the dreams were not a sign of weakness. They were a sign that my mind was finally processing what my body had been holding for 6 months. She said the dreams would stop when I was ready to let go. She did not tell me how to let go. She told me to be patient with myself. She told me that I had been patient with everyone else. It was time to be patient with me. The nightmares stopped in August. I do not remember the last one. I do not remember the night I stopped dreaming about the phone and started dreaming about other things. I only remember waking up one morning. The sun coming through the window, the birds outside, the ordinary noise of a summer day beginning, and realizing that I had slept through the night. I lay in bed for a long moment, testing the silence. There was no fear, no racing heart, no phantom messages glowing in the dark. There was just me, in my bed, in my house, on a summer morning that asked nothing of me except to get up and live. I got up. I made coffee. I sat on the porch. I watched the roses. And I felt something I had not felt in months. I felt quiet. Not the quiet of waiting, not the quiet of hiding. The quiet of a woman who had finally stopped running and was learning to stand still. I went back to the courthouse in September. Not for a hearing, not for any reason I could explain. I was driving home from work, and I found myself taking the exit that led to the building where I had spent the most important morning of my life. I parked across the street. I sat in my car and looked at the doors I had walked through 6 months earlier, carrying a binder that had changed everything. The building looked smaller than I remembered, less intimidating. It was just a building, stone and glass and doors that opened and closed. I sat there for 20 minutes. I did not go inside. I did not need to. I had come to say goodbye to the person I had been that day, the one who had walked in with her binder and her steady hands and her heart full of evidence. She had done what she needed to do. She had fought. She had won. And now she was gone, replaced by someone who was still learning how to be a person again. I started the car. I drove home. I did not go back. The first time I laughed, really laughed, was in October. A year since the phone, a year since the messages, a year since I stood in my kitchen and watched my life rearrange itself into something I did not recognize. I was at dinner with a woman I had met through a friend, someone who did not know my story, who did not know about the binder or the hearing or any of it. She told a story about her dog, something ridiculous, something about the dog stealing a loaf of bread off the counter and running through the house with it. I laughed. I did not mean to. It came out of me sudden and unexpected, the way laughter does when you forget to hold it back. The woman looked at me and smiled. She said, "I like your laugh." I did not know what to say. I had forgotten I had a laugh. I had forgotten what it sounded like. I thanked her. I changed the subject. But that night, driving home, I thought about the sound I had made. I tried to remember the last time I had laughed like that. I could not. It had been so long that the memory had faded, the way memories fade when you stop using them. I laughed again in the car, alone, just to hear what it sounded like. It was quiet. It was rusty. It was mine. I do not tell you this because it is a happy ending. Happy endings are for stories, and this is not a story. This is a life, my life. And lives do not end with a single moment of victory. They continue. They unfold. They surprise you when you least expect it. I did not win because I walked out of that courtroom with the house and the money and the property in Galveston. I won because I walked out of that courtroom and did not stop walking. I kept going. I kept showing up. I kept watering the roses and making coffee and sitting on the porch and waiting for the nightmares to stop. I kept going to Eleanor's office week after week, learning how to be a person who did not need to hate anyone to be free. I kept laughing when I forgot to hold it back. I kept living. The binder is still in my closet. I have not opened it in over a year. I do not need to. It is not a reminder of what I lost. It is a reminder of what I built while they were busy taking what they thought was mine. And on the days when I forget who I am, when I slip back into the old story, the one where I was the woman who trusted too much and waited too long and loved people who did not deserve it, I remember the binder. I remember the 6 months of silence. I remember the morning in the courtroom, the judge's voice, the sound of the gavel. I remember that I did not break. I waited, I watched, I built, and when the time came, I opened the binder and let the truth do what the truth always does when you give it enough time. It set me free. But freedom, I have learned, is not a destination. It is a practice. It is the choice you make every morning to get up and live your life instead of the one they left you with. It is the decision to laugh when you do not expect it. It is the patience to let the nightmares fade and the roses grow and the woman you became in the silence find her way back to the world. I am not the woman I was before October 19th. I will never be that woman again. But I am not the woman who walked into that courtroom with a binder under her arm either. I am someone new. Someone I am still learning to know. Someone who is learning to be patient with herself, the way she was patient with everyone else. Someone who is learning that winning is not the same as being free, but freedom is the only victory that lasts. The binder is in my closet now, not the bottom drawer of my desk where I kept it during the months I was building my case, not the filing cabinet where I stored the copies Patricia made for the court. It is in my closet, on the top shelf, behind a box of winter coats I have not worn in years. I put it there on purpose. I wanted it somewhere I could reach if I needed it, but somewhere I would have to make a choice to find it. I have not needed it in a long time. I do not think I ever will again. It has been 2 years since the hearing. 2 years since I walked out of that courtroom with a binder under my arm, and a future I did not know how to imagine. 2 years since I sat in my kitchen and read the letter from Jenna, the one where she wrote 4 pages of words that meant nothing and meant everything, depending on how you looked at them. 2 years since I saw Mark in the grocery store standing in the produce section, holding an apple he did not buy, saying he was sorry in a voice that sounded like a man who had finally run out of lies. 2 years. I have learned something in that time. I have learned that time does not heal anything. Time does not heal wounds. Time gives you space to build something new around the wound, to grow over it, to make it part of you instead of letting it be all of you. But the wound is still there. I can feel it sometimes, on quiet nights, when the house is still and I am alone with my thoughts. It does not hurt the way it used to. It is not sharp. It is a dull ache, the kind of ache that reminds you of something without demanding that you feel it. I have learned to live with it. I have learned to let it be. Jenna was released from federal custody 6 months ago. I know this because her sister called me to tell me. The sister, the one who had been mentioned in the text message about the fake pregnancy, the one who had known what Jenna was doing and had said nothing. She called me on a Sunday afternoon. I almost did not answer. The number was not in my contacts, and I had learned to be careful about numbers I did not recognize. But something made me pick up. She said her name. She said she was calling because she thought I should know. She said Jenna was out. She said Jenna was living with their mother in San Antonio. She said Jenna had asked about me. She said Jenna wanted to write to me again, wanted to explain, wanted to make things right. I listened to her voice, the way it trembled on certain words, the way she was trying to be brave about something she did not know how to fix. When she finished, I did not say anything for a long moment. I thought about Jenna. I thought about the woman I had met in Jester Hall 20 years ago, the one with the too big suitcase and the smile that filled the room. I thought about the woman who had driven 3 hours to sit with me in a hospital waiting room. I thought about the woman who had stood beside me at my wedding and caught the bouquet and laughed like she meant it. I thought about the woman who had taken my husband, my trust, my sense of what was real, and had built a life on the ruins of it. I thought about all of it, all of her, all of us. And then I said, please do not let her write to me. Please tell her that I wish her well. Please tell her that I hope she finds peace. But please tell her that I cannot be the one to give it to her. The sister said she understood. She said she was sorry. I said I was sorry too. I hung up the phone. I sat in my living room, in the house that was mine, on the couch I had chosen by myself, and I let the silence settle around me. I did not cry. I did not feel angry. I felt something I had not expected to feel. I felt finished. Mark is still in custody. He will be for another year. I do not think about him the way I used to. In the beginning, he was in my thoughts every day. I would wake up thinking about him. I would go to sleep thinking about him. I would hear his voice in the silence, see his face in the crowd, feel his presence in rooms where he was not. That does not happen anymore. He has become something else. Not a memory, exactly. Memories are things you visit. He has become a fact, a thing that happened, a chapter that ended. I do not hate him. I tried to hate him, in the beginning. I thought hatred would be easier than the other things I was feeling. But hatred is a heavy thing to carry. It is a weight you strap to your back and drag through your days, and after a while you forget you are carrying it because it has become part of you. I did not want to be that person. I did not want to be the woman who hated her ex-husband. I wanted to be the woman who had moved on. So I let the hatred go. It was not a single moment. It was a series of moments, small choices I made every day. To think about something else. To feel something else. To let the space he'd occupied in my mind fill up with other things. The roses in the front yard. The green bedroom. The mornings with coffee and silence. The afternoons with Eleanor, in her office full of plants, learning how to be a person who did not need to hate anyone to be free. I have started traveling. It was something my mother always wanted to do. Travel. See the world. Go to places she had only read about in books. She died before she got the chance. I used to think about that sometimes, when I was married. I used to think about the places she never saw, the things she never did, the life she never got to live because she ran out of time. And then I would think about my own life, the one I was living, the one I thought was permanent, and I would tell myself that I had time. I had time to travel. I had time to see the world. I had time to do all the things my mother never got to do, and then I lost 8 years to a man who was never going to take me anywhere I needed to go. I have stopped waiting. Last year I went to Italy. I went alone. I walked through Rome, through Florence, through the hills of Tuscany, and I did not think about Mark or Jenna or the binder or any of it. I thought about my mother. I thought about how she would have loved the light in Florence, the way it turned the buildings gold in the late afternoon. I thought about how she would have laughed at me trying to speak Italian, how she would have held my arm on the cobblestone streets, how she would have been proud of me for going alone. I sat in a piazza in Siena, drinking coffee, watching the sun set behind the cathedral, and I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt joy, not the joy of victory, not the joy of revenge, the joy of a woman who had survived something she did not think she could survive, and had found herself on the other side of it, still standing, still walking, still willing to see what came next. I have thought about whether I would do it again. The waiting, the watching, the binder, the silence. I have thought about it more times than I can count, and the answer is always the same. I would, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to see them lose. I would do it again because the woman who stood in that kitchen on October 19th deserved better than what she was getting. She deserved to know that she was not crazy. She deserved to know that she was not paranoid. She deserved to know that the life she had built was worth protecting, even if the people she built it with did not deserve to share it. And the only way to give her that knowledge was to wait, to watch, to build, to let them believe they were winning, because when they believed they were winning, they stopped being careful. And when they stopped being careful, they gave me everything I needed to take my life back. People ask me sometimes if I am bitter. They ask me if I regret the years I spent with Mark, the years I spent trusting Jenna, the years I gave to people who were not giving anything back. I am not bitter. Bitterness is the opposite of growth. It is a seed that never opens, a root that never reaches for water. I am not bitter. I am grateful. Grateful for the patience I did not know I had. Grateful for the strength I did not know I was building. Grateful for the woman I became in the silence, the one who sat across from liars and smiled, the one who built a binder when other women would have built a wall, the one who walked into a courtroom with steady hands and showed them exactly who they were dealing with. That woman did not exist before October 19th. She was born on that day, in that kitchen, holding that phone, and she has been growing ever since. The roses are blooming now. It is spring again, the third spring since the divorce, the third spring in a house that has become mine in ways I did not know a house could be mine. I planted the roses 2 years ago, the ones my mother used to grow, the ones she said were impossible to kill if you remembered to water them. They have grown taller than I expected. They climb the fence in the backyard, reach toward the sun, open their petals in the morning light. I sit on the porch some mornings, coffee in hand, and watch them. I think about my mother. I think about the life she did not get to live. I think about the life I am living now, the one I built from the ruins of the old one, the one I did not think I would have when I was standing in that kitchen holding a phone that was not my own. I think about the binder in the closet, on the top shelf, behind the box of winter coats. I think about the pages inside it, the hotel receipts and credit card statements and text messages, the evidence of a life that ended so another life could begin. I do not open it. I do not need to. It is not a reminder of what I lost. It is a reminder of what I built while they were busy taking what they thought was mine. If you are sitting at your kitchen table right now, staring at a phone you are not supposed to see, wondering if you are imagining what you know is true, I want you to hear something. You are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are not alone. The people who betrayed you are counting on your silence. They are counting on your confusion. They are counting on the part of you that wants to believe in them, that wants to give them the benefit of the doubt, that wants to pretend that what you are seeing is not real. Do not give them that. Do not give them your silence. Do not give them your confusion. Give them patience. Give them watchfulness. Give them the version of yourself that is willing to wait, to build, to prepare for the day when the truth will have its moment. And when that day comes, walk into the room with your binder in your steady hands and show them exactly who they were dealing with all along. Because the truth is not loud. The truth is not fast. The truth is patient. The truth waits. And when it finally opens, it does not need to shout. It only needs to be seen. I still have the binder. It is in my closet on the top shelf behind the winter coats. I have not opened it in over a year. I do not need to. I carry it with me in a different way now. I carry it in the way I walk, the way I speak, the way I trust my own eyes when they show me something I do not want to see. I carry it in the roses that climb my fence, the green bedroom where I sleep, the mornings I spend on the porch with coffee and silence. I carry it in the woman I became, the one who did not break, the one who waited, the one who built something they did not see coming, and then let it speak for her when she was finally ready to be heard. The story I told you today is not a story about revenge. It is a story about survival. It is a story about patience. It is a story about a woman who learned, in the hardest way possible, that the people you love can be the ones who hurt you most, and that the strength to survive that hurt is not something you find. It is something you build, one page at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time, until one day you wake up and the binder is in the closet and the roses are blooming and you are free